Hi, everyone. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Fundamentalists podcast. If you thought we were gone, we were for a little bit, but we're back now. Pete, how are you?
I'm very well, sir. How are you?
Very
Did
good. It's
you-
rainy here in Los Angeles, as we were just
I
talking about.
saw
Oh,
I saw a picture of you guys, or not a picture, a video of you guys going to Florida to see Weezer. When did that
yes,
happen?
yes.
When did
Well,
that happen?
Grace and I did for Christmas. We got each other. We had categories of gifts, and one of them was an experiential gift. And so I got us like a cooking class with a chef to do as like part of a date that we've canceled 3 times already. And she got me tickets to see Weezer along with Pitbull and Imagine Dragons at Tampa Stadium, Raymond James
Wow.
Stadium in Tampa. It was very fun, and they did great. Weezer still got it, and Imagine Dragons, the lead singer, is incredibly built, strong, cut,
Yeah.
swole,
The kids
big
say
boy.
ripped. Is that right?
What is it?
The kids say ripped.
Ripped. He's ripped. Yeah, yeah. And that made me. He was all shirtless and doing a great job, but it made me uncomfortable. And I was like, we could probably leave now after Weezer. And was like, that's too intimidating. But it was a great time. We had a wonderful experience.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Where
Yeah.
did
How
you
about you?
go?
What have you been up to? Oh, this
Oh,
last weekend.
last week. I have been, not doing too much, just settling back into Belfast life, and that's been a lot of fun. Um,
Nice.
have I done anything exciting? Not.
Can you describe that art behind you?
Oh yeah, this is a detail from a piece of art. It's my one of my favorite pieces of art. It's by Barnett Newman. It's called The First Station, and
Cool.
he's a very big fan of this notion of the zip, which is kind of this line that goes vertically down a painting. He was a contemporary of Rothko's, and Rothko is very interested in the horizontal line, and Rothko with the vertical
Yeah.
line. And
Cool.
he creates this line. You can see it is by negative space. So puts masking tape down, paints, and then rips the masking tape off. So it's negative space.
Nice.
And very interesting. I like his work a lot. This is kind of the high
Yeah.
point of his work.
Yeah, it's cool. I like that a lot. It's very pleasant to look at. And I don't understand it, but I do like Rothko. So, Pete, today we're gonna do a new thing here, folks. We're gonna do a new running gag where, as I mentioned, it's been raining in LA. It's been raining in LA for quite a bit of time. And when your buddy gives you boxes and boxes of books to take care of, sometimes the rain touches them and ruins them. And then sometimes you think, oh, you'll just leave them out to dry them, and they grow mold all over them. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to read a few book titles that Pete doesn't own anymore. These are books that Pete used to have, and he doesn't. And we're going to talk about them, and we're going to see what his reaction is to not having these books anymore. So the
I can't
first,
believe you told me about the disaster live on the podcast. I think that was very
I
impressive.
know that was impressive and a real dick move, and I'm so sorry, but it was, I do it for the content, hilarious stuff.
Yes. And
Just as a
literally,
content creator.
I have no idea what has been destroyed, what has been lost to the floods. Because we may talk about creationism, about the worldwide flood today, but the flood that was LA, the
Yes,
local flood, destroyed a lot of my books. You did not make an arc.
yes.
So this is going to be a regular segment of books I no longer own. Okay.
Yes, books Pete no longer owns.
And I don't know if
And
I am hearing this live, so I may cry at a couple of these.
right. Let's see if you cry at this one though, because I'd like for you to explain yourself on this. I'm not going to say what it is. I want everyone to hear Pete's reaction first.
Oh, is that is that Helmut Newton?
Yes,
Not,
it is.
not,
It
no,
is
that's
Helmut
not his
Newton.
ass. I don't mean that's his ass. I mean, is that a
It is
book?
someone else's ass, but it is a full-on butt, and it's a woman's. It's a book entitled. Do you want to read the title? Do you know the title?
Oh, let me see. Because you're very small, and I can't.
And it's
I can make you
backwards.
bigger. I'm going to make you bigger. Oh, I can't.
It's called White Women.
Is it?
Yeah,
That's not
it's
one of
called
my
White
books. That must be
White
one of
Women.
yours.
Yeah,
White
no,
woman.
no. Yeah, this is definitely yeah. It's a. I looked through it, and it is true to its title. It's a
What's
lot
it
of white
called?
women.
Who's it by?
Hell, you got it. Helmet
Oh, Helmut
Helmet
Newton. Oh, yeah,
Helmet
yeah.
Newton.
Yes. I thought so. Like this, I was very confused. Yeah, he's a very interesting artists. Actually, my friend Gavin Miller has a very Helmut Newton style. Um,
Yeah,
and
I've seen his
yeah,
stuff before. It's very sexy
very
photography.
sexy. So yeah, so Newton was kind of like he was this cool New York kind of like very really yeah this very cool style. So I've lost
Yeah,
that. Oh well, don't mind too
I know.
much about
I'm
that one.
sorry. What about logic and the case other of Anselm nonsense and his God?
That that is the weirdest title I've ever heard. Say it again.
Logic and other nonsense. The
Ah,
case of Anselm and his God. It's really a case of bad graphic design. But
oh
does
yeah,
that sound familiar?
yeah. No, that's a good book actually. That's a book I read like 20 years ago. That is a
So
good
you know
book,
how it ends.
but I know it. I know what it's arguing, so I don't mind it. I lost that, but that's an interesting one. Yeah,
Are you
logic.
familiar with the idea of postmodern theology by Graham Ward?
Yeah, I don't mind that. That's from a long time ago. Although
I
that's
like you're just throwing authors that you'd probably know under the under the bus. Nah, I don't give. I know him. He doesn't give a shit. Very funny. Oh, this one sucks. That I felt really bad about this one. German expressionist woodcuts. I'm really sorry.
oh yeah. Although I can get that one
That one's
easy
bad.
again, but yeah, that's one of those coffee table books. Oh, that's okay, but that is one that out of all of them so far,
Yeah,
that's the one I miss most.
that one stings. Well, this one's gonna blow your mind, and I can get you another copy. This is called Ion by C.G. Jung.
Thank God they took something that I wanted to get rid of. Thank yes.
It's so symbolic that it was a flood. Beautiful.
Oh,
Finally took Jung out. The
I
waters of
read
the
that book
unconscious.
actually. I read that recently, funnily enough. I read that after you decided to go down the dark path, and I thought, oh, I want to read that book because that's definitely one of his kind of like key texts in some respects. Some people
Yeah,
really see that as, yeah,
it's wild. That one he
yeah.
gets pretty wild. And then lectures on the philosophy of religion by somebody named Hegel.
Which there's like three of those. Are they all gone?
No, not all of them, Pete. But volumes, I'm sure volume one is still around. Actually, these might be okay. Some of these stacks I got confused. And but anyway, and then Jacques Lacan, The Death of an Intellectual Hero by Stuart Schneiderman.
Oh yeah, that's okay. He's actually, from what I remember, he was a Lacanian who became quite critical of Lacan. Don't hold me to that. Anybody's listening, but I think so. So yeah, I don't mind that.
Okay,
Okay, this yeah.
cool.
Uh,
Well, we'll visit more. That's just scratching the surface, everybody, of this very awkward thing. And Pete, again, I'm so sorry that I ruined some of your belongings, but
and by some,
that's
he hasn't really given me a notion of how many. What is
well, I
some?
can't count that high. I
Yeah.
can't. I can. That I will tell you offline because I genuinely feel so bad. I mean, dude, it was like you had
Well, just
died. It
tell me,
was.
how long will this segment last? I mean, will this segment be for the next 5 years? If you did like
It
five
depends.
books a week?
Yeah, I mean, we'll keep it go. It'll last as long as the remainder of this podcast for sure. Like as a series, so it'll be good. Uh, yeah. There's one Tillich. You lost a Tillich. Anyway, all right. So let's. Speaking
Tillich
of
book. Which Tillich book? Just tell me which Tillich book. You can't just leave me in
oh.
that. You just say, oh, you lost
Please,
a Tillich
please
book.
just no. Don't just leave me there. A guide for the perplexed.
Oh, that's about Tillich. That's okay.
Okay, great. Why Marx was right, but I think you're aware of that in your mind.
I wonder who wrote that. Why Marx's Drive? Was that Terry Eagleton?
You got this stuff figured out. Yeah, that's exactly correct.
He's a very good writer.
Oh,
He lives in Northern Ireland, funnily enough.
Darian Leader. Lost Darian Leader.
Darian Leader. Oh, Darian Leader. Oh, he's good. I lost Darian
Why do
Leader.
women write more? Yeah, why do women write more letters than they send?
Yeah, yeah, he's very good. He's Nick
I love
Cave's
that.
big
I
one.
said. That's right. Yeah. All right. So speaking of floods, speaking of ancient texts, Pete, we talked. One of the reasons sometimes that we don't do updated or regularly scheduled podcasts is because we'll chat and sometimes we'll postpone the chatting and it all just has a domino effect. But one of the things that you mentioned last time we were talking is that you've gotten really into young Earth creationism. From
Yeah.
you've become a little fascinated by it. We were talking about this in relation to me being into I guess UFOs or something. But
Well,
I
I feel
love
bad.
the
I hope I didn't. That maybe that whenever you said about UFOs, I went, well, I'm into young Earth creationism. You know, you may not think that they're the same.
I get that they're very similar. I see the similarities, and we can talk about that. But I also find young Earth creationism to be an incredibly, especially as someone who used to believe in young Earth creationism, I always find it very fascinating to come back and revisit it. I'm curious about what got you into it, what you've been watching and consuming, and what your takeaways are as a result of consuming this very interesting subject that people tend to still believe in.
Yeah, I love to kind of jump into weird rabbit holes like everybody on YouTube, and get into stuff that's either minority or weird or wonderful, all of that. And the young Earth create. Sometimes it's because I think the people who are on the outside, the outsiders, even if their position might be flawed and fundamentally flawed, and you'll like this because I think this is why you like UFO stuff. Is there's always something really interesting in it. Sometimes they're very good at seeing a critique, very good at seeing the problems with society. Sometimes it's kind of like there's something in what they're saying that, while not literally true, symbolically has a loads of value and loads of interest. And then sometimes it's, for me, it's like intellectual Sudoku. Like you're trying to figure out what is the central problem. I like to do that if I kind of watch something to kind of go, what can I isolate where things go wrong here, in a very solid way.
What did you find? Where did it go wrong?
Mm. Okay,
Where
with
does it
my
go wrong with this? Say I get into, hypothetically, I start getting into, I go to the creationism subreddit, I read a couple articles, and all of a sudden I text you and I'm like, hey, Pete, you're not going to believe this, but like I genuinely think that the Earth is about 5,000 years old, or 6,000 years old, and I believe that it was created in 7 days, and I think I can prove to you why.
yes. So, well, the where I think it goes wrong, right, is so Ken Ham is one of the major, as you know, good old. Have you ever been to the Creationist Museum, by the way?
No, but I will go the moment I'm in that town. Like, and
Yes,
I, which well might not be ever, but really want to go to it. I've seen so many pictures and videos of people going through it, and it is quite wild.
it is quite wild. I mean, yeah, I kind of regret not doing it when I was in America.
Hmm.
So someday I will do it. But he obviously Ken Ham, who I've heard speak live actually.
Nice.
Interestingly, like about 20 or 30 years ago, 20 years ago, he was in Belfast. I think he's been here a couple of times, and I've seen him do
That's
it.
fun. When I was in, when we were going to this concert, it was at a place called Raymond James Stadium, and I turned to Grace and I was like, the first time I went to Raymond James Stadium was when I was a child, and I saw Billy Graham live. So that's
Oh,
another heavy hitter in that world. I don't know if
that's
you're
a heavy
familiar
hitter.
with Dr. Graham.
Dr. Graham, yeah, he's a fascinating guy, fascinating. But
I don't know
Ken,
if he had a doctorate.
yeah,
Yeah,
fascinating.
Ken Ham is a different. Ken Ham is a different breed. So, and he seems quite. When I see Ken Ham stuff, he always seems quite upset, quite angry. Not. He doesn't seem like the guy with a great sense of humor.
No, no, and I kind of wonder because I did watch a lot, and I do wonder whether he's kind of chilled out a tiny bit because when
Okay.
I saw him, he was very. In fact, I got talking to him. I went with a friend of mine called William Crawley, who's a BBC journalist, and William Crawley was interviewing him. So I don't know if it ever happened, went live or anything like that, but he definitely was quite aggressive kind of guy, like, or just kind of defensive, I guess. I don't know whether he's lightened up slightly, but he is a very intense person. Um,
Yeah.
Thankfully, like if he based his arguments purely on biology, then that's not my area and whatever. But thankfully, Ken Ham's central argument is a philosophy argument, so that means it's in my wheelhouse. And he basically says, and it's kind of an interesting argument. So you'll see what you think of this. So his argument is basically everyone kind of has a metaphysical position, whoever you are. And the two major metaphysical positions, just to simplify it dramatically, is, and he doesn't use these terms, but these are the philosophy terms, you're either an idealist or a materialist.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're an idealist, the most simple form of idealism is mind is the foundation of matter. At the
Yeah.
very core of reality is thought, is mind, is reason, out of which everything arises. And if you're a materialist, you say that mind arises out of matter, an epiphenomenon of matter, right? So there's your two metaphysical positions. And then Ken Ham
This is a
said,
great 101. This is a very succinct. This is good. This is good.
"Ah, that's good. Okay, yeah, that's good." And then he says, which is an interesting argument, he says, if you're a scientist, you're coming with basically one of these positions. And he says most biologists are, he would call it naturalists, which is materialists. And most biologists are metaphysical naturalists. So when they see the evidence, they read and filter the evidence through metaphysical naturalism. And when a creation scientist, when Ken Ham does it, he says, "Listen, I have my metaphysics as well. I'm just as guilty as everybody else. I'm a," he would say, supernaturalist or whatever, or Christian, young Earth creationist, but an idealist. He's a form of idealist. He says, "So I look at the same data as the metaphysical naturalist, and I filter that data through my metaphysical presupposition. Same data, you kind of come to different results." And he says the problem is a lot of biologists don't admit that they're metaphysical naturalists, and that's not a scientific position. That's a philosophical. That's a metaphysical
Yeah.
position, and that's why ultimately for Ken Ham the argument is more basic than science. It comes down to metaphysics. So, what
Yeah.
do you think of that argument?
Sold. Absolutely sold.
Mm. So, when you
I don't
come
have any
to
notes.
what's that?
I have no notes. I think that it's. I think that Ken Ham's right.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
No, it's like a very like old like everyone. Oh, the scientists have this like lens that they see everything through, and it's materialism, and they sometimes can't step out of their own materialistic lens in order to entertain different ideas. But my understanding, and this goes back to like folks like Jeff Kripal and folks who are in kind of that academic world, is a lot of the people in the biological sciences are not as strict Darwinian evolutionists as sometimes people like Ken Ham might like to imagine. Maybe they were like 40 years ago, but there's still like a more openness now than there used to be. I think it's not quite as black and white as what Ken Ham wants to say it is.
yeah, yeah. No, that's a good point. And like, also, like, the now see if you think this critique works, because this is where I think it goes
Okay,
wrong.
great. I'm so excited.
Is that let's assume he's right. I like to kind of assume the person's right, and then
Yes, yeah.
do reductio ad absurdum, whatever. So, but let's kind of assume he's right. Like we all have metaphysical positions that they're not based on our observation of the world. We kind of impose them, kind of deductively on the world. Um, there's a sociologist called Peter Berger who he says that, but when someone does science, they it is true that they become a naturalist or a materialist, but methodological naturalist, not a metaphysical naturalist. So metaphysically you could, believe that in
Yeah.
be an idealist, but as soon as you're doing scientific work, you assume that there is a natural explanation to what you're studying. And
Yes.
that and so I think the mistake Ken Ham makes is not making a distinction between metaphysical naturalism and methodological naturalism. So there are a lot of scientists actually who do have religious beliefs, but when they're doing scientific research, they're always looking for a natural cause to the effect that they're studying.
Yeah.
Um, and they
Uh,
may oh, go ahead.
no, after you, please.
I was going to say, like, they might ultimately think, for example, scientists might ultimately think that there's a mind behind everything or that started everything. Um, but they still approach the world naturalistically. And the idea is maybe eventually they think they'll come to a dead end, but they have to keep
Yep.
pushing, yeah, until that point.
In my experience, I was so just a good precious kid in college, and I was trying so hard to be what I thought was balanced. So, some people, they're the naturalists or the materialists, and then other people, they're Christian or idealist or whatever they do. And so I would read like creationist stuff while in zoology classes, and it was like my degree had a bunch of like evolution, like it was the technical term was zoology with an emphasis in like ecology, evolution, and biology, and so it was a lot of evolution. And it took about like a month before I was like, oh no, this is like you can't really ignore that this is all how it basically happens. But then going into things like philosophical or metaphysical stuff over the years, I've kind of gone from the hard and fast Darwinian evolutionist stance to something akin to evolutionary panentheism, or something where consciousness is more of a fundament than like a offshoot of the brain. But it is interesting because I don't think it is. I don't think you. I think there's a heck of a leap that these guys do with creationism, because they go, well, we think there's something, so it must be this. It must be God. It must be Genesis, and it must be like, and it's like that's a very specific, maybe an overreaction a little bit. Maybe there is something to be said about consciousness, but going back to reverting or regressing to a literal understanding of Genesis seems like a bad move.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that hits on another issue that I've been kind of hitting against watching Ken Ham is he's not just an idealist, as you're saying, like he's not just kind of like reflecting on the idea that either there's an intelligence or even a mathematical structure. I mean, an idealist might simply say that there's a mathematics is the necessary foundation
Yeah.
of all reality. So idealism, doesn't commit someone to belief in God. Um, uh, but he's not just saying that, but he's kind of that he is actually making claims that are scientifically verifiable and falsifiable, which is that, as you say, 6,000 years ago there was a global flood.
Yeah.
Certain dinosaurs lived among human beings. There is no kind of what they call macroevolution in the fossil record. Like they are actually making
Oh,
claims, yeah, to
when
science.
you said macro evolution, I felt my brain hurt for a second. That brought something back. Oh
Oh yeah,
no. Oh no. It's
yes,
like that when they do the sure you can do or you can adapt, but you can't switch species. You
yes,
can't. It's
yeah.
like, oh, okay. No,
It's
that's
clever.
not.
It's clever because that allows them to kind of like admits what is obvious, which is adaptation happens. I mean, you can actually see it in fruit
Yeah.
flies, whatever. While trying to deny species transformation. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I believe in sand, but I don't believe in beaches.
Yes,
Basically, I believe in
that's good. Well, here I'm interested
whatever.
because I forgot, like you were studying zoology in university. Were you, when you were studying zoology, under the influence of creationism still?
Oh,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, so what was that like? Because and did you bring the creationism into, like, did you talk to any of your professors about it?
No, no, I was pretty well aware of where they kind of stood on it, but I also just paid attention as much as I could to the classes. But I think this goes into a different area of this conversation, which is, yeah, it definitely had a huge impact on whether my level of devotion toward that version of Christianity at the time. I mean, it definitely made it so that I was like, this doesn't make any sense, because it's so tied into uh uh the genealogy that gets to like Jesus, that people then have this attachment to young earth creationism, where if they lose that, they lose the foundation of their whole faith, basically. So like they
Yeah.
have to kind of keep it, otherwise the house of cards will fall. And at one point I was just like, I just let the house of cards fall, because I was like, oh, this isn't. And I found, at least when I was in college, evolution is a pretty cool theory. Like it's a kind of a beautiful theory. It's darkly beautiful, and there's a lot of death, but like the way it works, I once I got it and I understood that it wasn't just like, oh, we evolved from monkeys or something, then I was like, oh, this is actually really really incredible. It still didn't explain everything, and I still don't think it explains everything, but still really, really intense. And then yeah, I was just like, okay, cool. I like it, and I kept it quiet. I didn't really talk about it.
Yeah.
I didn't talk about creation. I didn't talk about evolution. I just sort of kept my mouth shut.
Yeah, and that is interesting because Ken does do that. He links it with your belief. So if he says basically, if you believe in Jesus and if you believe
Then
in terms of confessional Christianity, if you believe in Jesus died for your sins, etc., then that commits you to believing, as you know all of this, but it commits you to believing in a literal fall, a literal Adam and Eve. So it's quite
yep,
clever because in a way, it's not that you believe in creationism because you studied it. It's because you're maybe seeing it tied into another belief that you take to be true. Yeah.
it
And,
becomes great 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 grandfathered in,
mm,
because that's about how far back it goes.
yeah.
Get it?
And something else you mentioned there, which is very true. Great, good, nice. Is
Thanks.
is that it's a darkly beautiful theory, which actually for many theists is a bit of a problem because like evolution kind of is premised on the idea that there's an unfathomable amount of death and suffering, like
Yeah,
unfathomable amount
yeah,
of death and suffering that has arisen, that has had to be gone through to kind of get to where we are, for
yeah,
example, now, and that that could be quite a lot for someone to take to go like, oh, the kind of in a way the most of the universe is black and lifeless, devoid of anything, and even this planet, this one little planet that, as far as we know at the moment, is got life in it, has been, and C.S. Lewis talked about this, most of it has been either lifeless or suffering, and it's
yeah,
only brief moments where animals have had non-suffering. It's very
yeah.
minor moments in the whole of history. That's quite a pill to swallow.
And yet we still are here, and we get to watch TV shows and read books and play video games like I was doing an hour and a half ago. So
Yeah.
it all I walked away with a deeper appreciation for nature and for animals after doing zoology. I think I also had a certain level of anger and frustration about the amount of just like scientifically speaking bullshit that the young earth creationists do. But then I came back around to think it's kind of hilarious. Like there's this thing called the hydroplate theory. Are you familiar with this?
Hydroplate theory. I'm not sure. Tell me about it. I don't think so. I don't think I've come
It
across it.
explains the flood in terms of the mid-Atlantic ridge at the between the two Pacific and the, what is it? I don't know. I don't know where the oceans are, but that is the, if you look at a globe, there's like a trail between the Europe and Africa and North and South America, where you can see this thing. And this guy was like, oh, what that was a volcano, but it didn't erupt lava. It erupted water. All the water was trapped under the plates, and so God caused it to explode out from that, which the water shot up at such a speed that it looked like it was raining all over the world, and that's what caused the flood.
Oh, yes, because I have heard some creationists talk about actually the flood. Yeah, it rose, it didn't fall from
Right.
the sky. Hence, maybe that's a way of explaining why uh, rainbows then came later once rain, whatever, started.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I do love the rainbow story. I mean, and then you get into like the actual myth element, and then I find, so what I found is zoology helped me pop the young Earth creation thing, and I found myself very much liking animals. And then the mythological aspect helped me reappreciate the Genesis story in a way that didn't feel like I was being bullshitted the entire time. So it all worked out in the end. I feel bad for folks who are still like, bad sounds condescending, but I feel like there's more joy to be had if you can kind of step away from that a little bit. And that's
Yeah,
my preaching for
yeah.
this episode.
Very good. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the creation story, yeah, like yourself, has a really interesting depth to it, and that's why it remains interesting. I take it primarily as an kind of Jewish Oedipal story. So same as when when Oedipus, kills his father and marries his mother or whatever. You have basically breaks the prohibition to get the object of
Yep.
desire. You see a similar structure in Adam and Eve, who the prohibition of God, they break through the prohibition to get the apple to become like God, and it's disaster.
Yep.
So yeah, I see some fascinating kind of psychoanalytic kind of insights into it. Once you kind
I
of like,
like.
yeah,
Go ahead. Sorry.
okay,
Once you. Yeah, I was just gonna say that it's that's also where you can just go and look at it and see the relevance for your life. I think that there's more relevance to your lived experience if you view things like that than if you view them as a historical document, which is strips them of their kind of multifaceted uh, quality, I guess. But
yeah.
yeah, and I like also the idea of the snake being like Lilith, who came back after Lilith was what was it? She refused to lie with Adam. She wasn't going to take that, so she went out and had sex with demons or something like that in the ocean, and then came back as a snake and tempted Eve to get back. I mean, that's fun too. So it gets really it's good stuff. I mean, I'm a big fan of Genesis. I just don't think that there's many literal answers in them.
Just to let the listener know that, because what you're referring to is that
Please
there's
do. I butchered it.
oh yeah, it's great. No, we actually got it completely right, but they might go, where does Lilith come from? Whereas there's a little bit in Genesis where it says, on the sixth day God created male and female, and then later on it says,
Oops.
after Adam had named all the animals and da 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 da, he got lonely, and so one night God took a piece of flesh from him and made woman. So there's this interesting question of, well, who was the woman who was made on the sixth day with Adam? Because Eve was made after the fact,
Ah,
when Adam was bored and had done all this work. Now, and it's just, but where some rabbis then told the story of Lilith, who was born on the
yes.
sixth day with Adam as an equal, and so it's brilliant. And in this story, it becomes fascinating. Oh, and Lilith
Oh, and
seduced God. Oh, good.
no, after you, please go ahead. Lilith,
Oh yeah, I
what?
was going to say my favorite bit of the story is Lilith gets God to tell her his secret name, and God tells her his secret name, and then Lilith speaks it aloud and gets this power of God because she had the name of God. She was able to signify the name of God. There's real interesting stuff in
Cool.
that notion. So yeah, and that's when she left Eden to sleep with demons and whatever.
Yeah, it's a very fun. I also have seen people talk about like the idea of in what is it, complementarianism and a traditional sort of Christian thing where the male and the female have complementary roles, but they're different and they're sort of, I think it's what is that, essentialism of some kind. But then the whole idea of Lilith is that she was immediately equal to Adam, and like Adam couldn't handle it. So there's a fun little like feminist critique in there too,
Oh,
which is nice.
right.
Neat.
Yeah, I talk about
Uh,
Lilith in my second book, Fidelity of Betrayal. Actually, I talk about Lilith.
oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Um,
Scary. She scares the crap out of me, which she should, because she's like she's out there being a, what is it, succubus? Is that what it is? Or no, that would make her the demon. I don't know. Words
you,
are confusing.
one of the things as well, I want to see what you think of this. Like, this is my more controversial view. Here, one other thing. I like the creationists. I love listening to Scientologists as well. That's another thing, a rabbit hole.
I need to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've listened to so many hours of both Scientology, and actually there's lectures by L. Ron Hubbard that you can get as well that I've listened to. Very
Cool.
interested in that, and OT8, and all of the mythology of L. Ron Hubbard's fascinating.
Cool.
But the thing that's maybe more controversial to say is, I think that there is an interesting link or way of reasoning that is very similar between someone like Ken Ham, the creationist, William Lane Craig, the Christian philosophical apologist, and people like Sam Harris and James Lindsay. Uh, Now, they're very different on the surface, but I think there's a lot of similarities between their love of this simplistic kind of clarity, that whenever you listen to them, you kind of get caught up in the kind of the clarity, the seeming ability to destroy all arguments in their wake. Um, but and also, however, a kind of a simplistic kind of like
Yeah.
of logic. So, because I
Surface
love
level.
watching James Lindsay. Do you ever watch James Lindsay stuff?
I think maybe you've told me about him. Let me Google him. I feel like you've mentioned James. What is James? Oh, wait a minute. This guy. Oh, this guy's such a turd, man.
I find he's
Oh,
so
this
interesting.
guy's. No, he is. He actually is because I was following him on Twitter. I saw him get owned on Twitter a little bit, but he did a really interesting. What was that speech he did on like wokeism and how woke will like essentially like turn around and all that? You know, it's the
Yeah.
typical anti woke thing. But what does he actually do? Because he seems to have quite a bit of different shades of the common right wing opinions. I guess I would say.
Yeah, he's fascinating because he actually reads philosophy. He reads it, very badly, but he reads it like so. Whereas some of the kind of the thinkers who I enjoy watching and listening to as well, but like people like Sam Harris or Camille Pallier or these people, or even Jordan Peterson. They haven't really read the stuff, right? So it's quite easy to critique. By the way, I do, as you know, I agree with their concerns more so maybe than you. I agree with their concerns about kind of critical race theory, et cetera, et cetera. But I think they take
Yeah.
it very seriously. But what the difference between most of those people and James Lindsay is James Lindsay actually reads philosophical texts and goes through them. So he reads, there's a philosopher called Herbert Marcuse, for example. He's always talking about, he reads his stuff. So I really like listening to James Lindsay because he, although he gets it all a bit wrong, he is at least reading it. So it's fast,
Yeah. At
which
least
makes
putting some effort in.
yeah, good. And but also he's got this kind of clarity that's the same as Ken Ham and William Lane Craig and Sam Harris is kind of like this seeming clarity that actually when you start picking it apart
Yeah.
doesn't really work, But
It's
I
like
haven't.
a shiny, very shiny arguments that are very slick and clean, and there's nothing to wear. And then you're like, wait a minute.
Yes,
I think what
yes,
you're saying is bullshit.
yes. I think my guess at the moment, and I haven't thought about it too much, but is that my I think where they all go wrong is they're not dialectic thinkers. They're all causal thinkers. So, like if they're talking about, say, Democrats and Republicans, they see them as opposites, or atheism and theism, they see them as opposites, and they don't see how the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are intimately interwoven in various political, cultural, religious ways. They
Yeah.
don't see how theism and atheism are intimately interconnected in various complex ways. So there's always an enemy that is easy to critique. Something here that's easy to critique
Yeah.
that's different from what I'm saying, and that kind of thinking is always very appealing because it makes everything very simple and you put things in buckets. Uh, but whenever you get into intellectual life, you kind of realize how interconnected everything is.
So is that what you're saying the link is between the Ken Hams and the yeah, it's a very like it's just different sides of the same basic idea, right? Like they're both going these people bad, this idea bad, the evolutionists are bad, the Republicans are bad, the Democrats are bad.
Yeah, that's what I think. Like, so, like, if I put it, and this is helping me think it through, but so William Lane Craig, for him, atheism and theism are separate opposites. He's a theist, there's atheists, and you kind of like, he wants to convince some atheists and you engage, but they're very separate. For Ken Ham, there's naturalism and supernaturalism. They are,
Yeah.
very different. And for James Lindsay, there's kind of proper philosophical or intellectual thought, and then there's this kind of like, continental rubbish or whatever. And for Sam Harris is kind of written and again is very kind of simple, kind of I think black and white way. So I think that's what is so appealing about them, and also where the main error is.
When you say continental rubbish though, aren't you a continental guy?
I'm a continental thinker. So James Lindsay hates continental philosophy. So he reads,
Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. So yeah, yes. So all the people that I like, he would kind of hate. I mean, someone like Herbert Marcuse, I don't think he's that great either, but he's definitely much better than James Lindsay thinks he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very funny.
Well, here's an example actually. So one of the things
Yeah,
James Lindsay doesn't like about Mercusa is Mercusa has this really interesting argument that at first any analytic thinker is not going to like, which is, you know, he kind of basically says that in contemporary society, we are less alienated. We're happier. You mentioned that we can play computer games, we can watch TV, we're not
I
doing
didn't
jobs.
say happier, but we can't do those things.
We
Yes.
can do those things, and we're we're not doing jobs necessarily that destroy our bodies in the same way that they might have 100 years ago, et cetera, et cetera. And so someone like Mercusa goes like, we live in a society in which alienation is no longer subjective. And James Lindsay reads this as kind of going like, well, so why would Marcuse be critical of society when he admits himself that things are better now? But then Marcuse comes off with the argument that alienation is objective. In other words, we are depressed and we don't know it. We can be, we can basically be, in the words of Marshall McLuhan, amusing ourselves to death. So we don't know we're alienated. We don't know that we're oppressed. We actually think we're happy. We're taking drugs. We're watching TV. We're da 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 da.
Yeah.
But actually, objectively, we are in alienation. And so James Lindsay, finds these kinds of arguments ridiculous because it's kind of dialectic. Either capitalism works. Some people say capitalism works, and that's why we should have it. Some people say capitalism doesn't work. So if you say capitalism works, you might say, well, there's increasing health, increasing better technology, et cetera, et cetera. So lives of people around the globe are being helped. Somebody else might say capitalism doesn't work. It generates recessions, depressions, economic precarity, et cetera, nuclear proliferation, environmental crisis, whatever. But again, the dialectic person says, no, capitalism works because it doesn't. Because there's
Yeah, I thought
something.
you were gonna say capitalism works and that's why we shouldn't do it.
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah. It's almost like, sometimes people say, does your relationship work or does it not? If it works, stay in it. If it doesn't work, don't. But actually, relationships work because they don't, for good or for bad reasons. It's actually the problems that
Yeah.
often keep us interconnected. So James Lindsay hates that kind of logic, drives him bananas.
No, that can't be true. That
Yeah.
doesn't make immediate sense in my brain, and therefore, this book is a little collection of essays by the Jungian Rafael Lopez Pedraza. It's called Cultural Anxiety,
Ooh.
and it made me think of that. But one of the things that we were looking into in the tech class that I'm taking, or technology, is dealing primarily with the way it's all different words to say the same thing, but dissociation and numbness that we now feel. Where and it's this general idea that the Freud had hysterics and Jung dealt with schizophrenics, but now the major, like, quote unquote neurosis is the inability to feel the neurotic symptoms. Like, people are unaware that they are,
Yes.
whether it's depression or anxiety or anger or even happiness. Like, we're very numb, and technology helps kind of like increase that numbness, and it made me think of that. So
Oh, very good.
um,
No, that's
it's fun.
brilliant, because that is very true. That's exactly what Marcuse is arguing about in his book One Dimensional Man. Which, I mean, he basically, what Marcuse says is, it's very difficult to have. Basically, Marcuse is a typical, continental academic. He wants to help people become revolutionary subjects, which is basically subjects who instigate transformation, right? And he says that it's probably not possible today. But one of the reasons why he says it's almost impossible is because in order to become a revolutionary subject, you have to feel dissatisfaction. Like, you almost have to go to
Yeah.
your job and like not like it, and that doesn't make you a revolutionary subject, but it creates a possibility because you don't like it, you see the problems, you feel shit.
Yep.
Because today, if you're working for Facebook, he obviously doesn't use this example because this was 50 a long time ago. But if you're working for Facebook, as I've said before, not only do you have to work for them, you have to like it, right?
Oh yeah.
So you don't even know you're alienated. That's what Marcuse says is one-dimensional man. You don't have two dimensions rubbing against each other. You don't even know that you're in suffering, right? And he has
Yeah.
this beautiful. He calls it euphor. I think he calls it something like euphoria and sadness, which for him is drug use. For example, you take drugs, you feel euphoria, but it's euphoria in the midst of oppression and sadness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. That's That's so sad. Yeah, I forget what I was going to say, but you said something. I don't remember what it was. But
But
anyway,
it,
we got off the topic of creationism, but it's the same. Maybe creationism is the drug. I guess that's the linking. But yeah,
yeah, well, I wonder if we can connect it back to that. We can definitely connect it to like stuff we've talked about lots before, but this idea that we do live in a society where it's kind of, seize the day, and we're told, we can do it, and we become our own oppressors to some extent, and that in Lacanian terms, the superego becomes the superegoic injunction to enjoy, and it kind of, you're actually oppressed by your own enjoyment, whether it's watching
yeah,
soap operas or whatever. Like we kind of, and say that Marshall McLuhan book, "Amusing Ourselves to Death," is a great title because it kind of
great
says,
time.
yeah, we somehow, amusement is a way in which we feel okay, but our sadness, our depression, our symptoms become objective. They become
Yeah,
visible in our body, not in our subjectivity.
nice. Yeah, the we were talking about the idea of one, the idea of wholeness being like the idea of wholeness being different from perfection, and that relating to the idea of spectacle, and how that is sort of a perversion of awe. And so we seek awe and we seek like a transformative experience, but then what we end up settling for is spectacle, where we just sort of hypnotize ourselves with screens and entertainment and drugs and whatever. And it's like a cheap copycat of what the actual thing is when you really feel moved by something, and it's so hard to do it, so we're just like reinforcing this. It's very sad. It's not a good situation. Somebody's got to fix it.
Yes, actually, and you mentioned the word spectacle. That's a very important word. And the academic Du Bois, I think, is he talks about that. Like, and he said, yes, spectacle is almost like where we get so caught up in the visual world that we're in, and
Yeah,
exactly what you say is that kind of covers over the kind of inherent kind of alienation and oppression. And so basically we make less and less, we own less and less, everything becomes higher. We enter into a type of neo-feudalism, and we all do it with smiles on our faces. This is,
yeah.
I know this is what some people, a lot of people on the right and on the left are worried about this. And I this is and I see this as a worry that's shared by people on both sides, which is this real concern that we are moving towards more totalitarian, kind of neo-feudal types of social relations, and we're amusing ourselves as we walk towards that. So there are people on yeah,
Just
who think that.
walking off
Uh,
the bridge.
yes, exactly.
Do you get for I mean, I get frustrated when I watch people like a lot. I think this goes back to what you're talking about with the Sam Harris thing, but you'll see someone like Sam Harris on something like Joe Rogan or something, and I don't know, maybe we need to get you a manager or something. We got to get you on. Let's be real, maybe you can get on, like, not, you won't be able to get on Rogan, I don't think,
How
but
low are we going to go? What, like what?
have you heard of the Fundamentalists
Yes, there you go. I
podcast?
can get on that.
Um, but no, the I think someone who has at least some kind of, like, even having Zizek on to Rogan, I think will be so nice, because he, without realizing it, I think all of the guests that whole ecosystem brings in have no interest in this kind of thing. And as a listener, I end up frustrated, because I'm like, why are bring up the what about what's going on unconsciously? What about what's going on that people aren't aware of? And people are only, like you're saying, they take that kind of very causal approach and in very surface level, and it's if anything else, kind of boring after a while. They need to spice it up.
That's my
Get
only
some
real.
Freud.
Yeah, I don't share the critiques a lot of people have Joe Rogan. I like him. I think he seems like a great guy. My only critique is actually what you're saying, exactly what you're saying, which is, and it's just because he doesn't know, but that all the thinkers are non-dialectic. None of the thinkers, as you say, embrace or explore notions of the unconscious or death drive or
Yeah,
dialectics, and that's a failure on the part of our team, right? That's a failure in the sense of there's
yeah.
very few people who are good at articulating that. A guy that I really like, I mean, I hate to say who I like, because you all go off people, but I do think Lex Friedman has a very Socratic method. I do like him a lot. He just interviewed Sam Harris, and I thought he did a great job. of kind
I've
of.
re-
Did you watch
oh, go
that?
ahead. No, but I've only ever listened to like one Lex Friedman podcast, and I know he gets criticism because he quote unquote platforms people that are unsavory at times, but he also, when I listened to him, I did kind of get the impression that he is a little, for my taste, not quite as what's the word I'm looking for, zesty. He's a little boring at times, but his questions are very good, and you can tell he really researches who he's talking. I
Yeah.
would listen to Pasulka, who wrote this book, American. Hang on, hang on, hang on! Don't ruin it! Don't ruin it! This D.W. Pasulka, UFOs, Religion, Technology, American Cosmic. Really great book, and it's a beautiful cover. But I was listening to her interview, and he did just a great job. But I'm curious what the conversation was like with him and Sam Harris.
Yeah, no, I find him very, very good for a number of reasons. One, he has a very Socratic method, so he's very empathetic in that attempts to understand the position of the other person, and he doesn't rise to anything. So, and he asks lots of questions, and he asks them in non-defensive ways. So he
Yeah,
has a
yeah,
very Socratic style, and that Socratic style can often draw out very subtly the contradictions in someone's thinking. Now, as you probably know, like Sam Harris has gone through a bit of a tough period with his. A lot of his followers are frustrated with him about a number of his views that he's had recently, and really feel that he hasn't been thinking as clearly and consistently as he should, because that's the one thing. Sam Harris is known to be a very clear and consistent thinker,
yeah. That's his
and
whole
in many
thing.
ways he is. I mean, I've never say been a huge fan, because I don't think when he writes on ethics and stuff, I've never been that impressed. But still, I respect him. I know I've met him a few times, and seems like a nice guy. Um, but the Lex Friedman interview very carefully, I think, drew out, some of the kind of like uh, circles that Harris has kind of got himself into with some recent kind of
Yeah,
positions. But I do say Lex Friedman is great at the questioning, and so I'm hoping. But again, he loves the kind of same kind of thing as Joe Rogan, similar type of audience. I would love to see him interview somebody who takes seriously the unconscious, or
yeah.
dialectic, or death drive. You know,
I
which are
think
all
you that was the name that popped in my head when I said maybe not Joe Rogan, but that was I was like maybe Lex Friedman or something. I think you could
yeah.
do a great job on, because you should go in and basically sabotage. I mean, you got to be a Trojan horse, and you got to do that thing where you drop all of these crazy ideas, and then everybody goes, "Wow, that's nuts! I've never thought of it that way." And then you go up the then you become the next Russell Brand, and
So
then you get
basically,
hated by a bunch of people.
yes. So you voted. I love this strategy you have. The first step is just the hard one. So the
Yeah,
first step is get on Lex Friedman, right? And
that's
then
like when I first moved to Los Angeles, and my family members would be like, "Well, you should just go get on a TV show."
yeah,
Yeah, thank you. That's cool. That's a good idea. Maybe I will. I
maybe
haven't
I'll
thought
do
about
that.
that.
Yeah, it's like the first step
Um,
to being successful in business is have $10 million. Okay,
have rich parents. Yeah.
as a rich parent.
Have a diamond mine somewhere, but or emerald mine. Excuse me. That's Musk's thing. But anyway, so back to creationism. So let's let's
Yeah.
let's bring it. Are you have you ever at any point when you're watching this stuff taken a step back and gone, "Dang, that's a really good point." Scientifically, not
Um,
philosophically.
yeah. Well, interestingly, like a long time ago, I got a wee bit more into it. Like I even read some of the books, and some of the things, I thought like that they were drawing out some of the limitations, some of the kind of the
Yeah.
gaps, and I think that's probably quite useful. But I would say no for two reasons. So one, they haven't been convincing to me at all. So, for example, when they talk about the irreducible complexity of the eye,
No,
I
wrong.
from the little I know, but like
Bullshit,
no,
wrong.
they're wrong. Yeah, like that's easy to see how the eye developed from
Easy.
photosynthesis or photosensitive cells to
Yeah.
kind of to concave to
Yeah. And
pin
there's living animals that you can look at that have like you could build the eye piece by
yes.
yeah, it's not
I mean, yeah. I mean, even Darwin saw it, and he was at the very beginning. So, none of those convinced me. But the other thing, which I do try to avoid, is I also go, there might be the odd good argument in there, but because I'm not trained as a biologist, I wouldn't know. I haven't been convinced by any, but I can only look at them from a philosophical place. But thankfully, I think, from a biological position, they get wiped out all the time. Obviously, there's not very much good there. That's why I think Ken Ham has
Yeah.
retreated to metaphysics. I like it genuinely. Like his position now, he keeps coming back to it. Is like not arguing. He does argue for creationism, but his main thing is, hold on, we both come with our presuppositions. I just have different presuppositions.
Everybody does it. Yeah.
Yes. And the funny thing is, biologists don't know how to respond to that because they're not philosophers. So that's where he can kind of muddy the water a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my favorite creationist critiques is why aren't there more fossils, even though A, there's a lot more than people realize, and B, it's incredibly difficult for any fossil to be formed. It's like miraculous that we have any kinds of bones,
Yeah.
even though they're not bones. But that was also something that blew my mind when I was in college, is finding out that skeletons, or the fossils, aren't actual bone. I always thought that they were the actual bones that we found, but they're
Waste rock.
replaced by sediment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I'm
Um,
guessing I wanted to look into that more because the last time I looked at the fossil record was honestly with decades ago. I'm going like I'm sure maybe there's a lot more in the last 20
Tons.
years. Is there? Like it's probably a lot more. Uh,
Yeah.
pro-
Transition species.
yes, yes. Have they found? Yeah, because that's one of the things creationists love to talk about. That we can't.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
you see different kinds, but you can't see anything between any of them. Well, that's what, yeah, you can, but yeah, that's my understanding at least, and I do believe, from what I understand, that people are also not as materialistic, I guess. And by the way, folks, if you can hear the just pouring rain, I apologize. I don't know if that's gonna pick up on the audio, but
I can't
we're
hear it.
getting flooded,
Yeah.
and I'm in my little ark. So, um, anyway, so creationism is a very funny theory, and I would get a little frustrated with is the history of our relationship, especially in America, with evolution in the classrooms, because I feel like that's an incredibly. I don't think it's fair to deprive kids of the most plausible scientific theory about the creation of the species because of you go back to like the Scopes trial, and they're all worried about the kids learning that they're from monkeys, and you can kind of see that happening now. This sort of constant thing of, oh, what about the kids? What are the kids gonna do if they learn that it's gonna hurt their feelings? And I think that that's a very infantilizing thing, and I think kids can handle it. At least I would have appreciated learning about it instead of having to learn it from the ground up and walk into it thinking that the Earth was 6,000 years old. I had like a disadvantage that affected my grades a little bit, and so that was annoying. Man, it's coming
Yeah.
down. Can you hear that?
I can't hear it. No, that's
It's
amazing. There's
wild.
rain in there.
Yeah. Anyway,
Well, here's two things I like about creationism. Can I mention two things that I think are kind of true, kind of right? Um,
yeah,
well,
I can do that too. Yeah, that's it.
oh, great. So the first is kind of and they're a kind of side ideas. One is Shizek brilliantly says. He says like there was a creationist who around the time of Darwin, whenever Darwin was talking about these ancient animals, that the response was fossils are what God put there
Yeah.
to
Oh yeah.
to make it look old, right? So
The
there's
devil. The devil.
there's a kind of like they're basically simulacra. They're the sedimentation of something that never existed. That for Shizek is a brilliant explanation of what object puttee is. Of that we believe that there are things that we encounter that we think or will give us wholeness and completeness, will kind of give us the thing. But as soon as we find them, we find these things are kind of echoes of something that doesn't exist. So I think that's a great metaphor. Is that
Interesting.
yeah,
So you're
object
not coming at it from the fact that that's a bullshit claim. You're coming at it from the fact that it serves a kind of function in the psyche to allow
yeah.
people to.
Like there's something really kind of we can use it to kind of describe something at least, which is oh yeah, we're constantly there are fossils of like so for example you look at something and you go if I could get that then that's going to complete me, and when you get it
Yeah.
it's a sedimented kind of dead thing
Steak.
which has no connection to anything real.
Yeah.
But then the other thing that I think is where Lacan called himself a creationist, and what he meant by that was he said that there was a moment when language arose that was not like an evolutionary gradual movement. The moment of language was kind of like almost like an equivalent to a creationist event. And I think that is correct. Like that there
Couldn't you
is.
also say it's like a Big Bang though? Like could you? But also, are we sure that from an anthropological level that language didn't slowly evolve for a while?
Well, I think you can. I think you can show that language didn't evolve from a philosophical perspective.
I
Um,
see. Okay.
and now, and I have to show my working out in that, but I think you can. And the reason why I would say that is, I think you have to make a distinction between communication and language. So, communication is obviously where a sound is made and a response is generated. You know, an animal
Yeah.
makes a sound, mating, danger, food, whatever. Language arises when something not like if you teach a monkey enough sign language, eventually it will speak, right? Not that kind of thing, but actually language arises when something drops out, when something is miscommunicated, and that event of dropping out is kind of like that's the beginning of language. So communication evolves, but I would argue, and you know, too, that communication evolves, but the moment that communication becomes language, and this might happen with AI eventually, is the moment the communication becomes language is not when it becomes complex enough, but rather when something is lost.
Yeah. When it can't quite get its words out correctly.
Yes, so language
Uh,
always kind of like misses the mark.
um, very interesting. Yeah. I mean, that's straight Lacanian, right? I mean, you did say Lacan. That's who said that,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking in terms of the just self awareness and the evolution of the fact that we can reflect on ourselves, the fact that we can be aware of ourselves, and also feel the tension of whatever we're going through in life and what we should be doing, like all that, like weird that stuff that makes you human, basically. That seems very strange to me that just kind of popped out and very like we just started not liking ourselves at some point and or kill. You know, it's very fascinating, and I do not subscribe to the strictly Darwinian thing. Like it does feel like something, and again, I can't show my work or prove any of this. And my intuition would say that there's some kind of thing going on or directing. Maybe it's a current that we're all going on. And systems theory is really popular. And it's sort of the idea that systems evolve, not just the organism, but the actual like groups of people together, and that and the different systems affect one another. That's all very fun. I don't think it has to be one or the other necessarily.
Well, see, that's interesting because, yeah, I agree with you. Like where I would want to make the argument that evolution is a theory that kind of explains biological life, and the reason why I'm not evolutionary psychologist. Evolutionary psychology basically applies biological evolution
Yeah.
to the realm of subjectivity. The reason why I'm not is because I think that once self-consciousness arises, uh, we have to take consideration of death drive, which
Yep.
therefore means that biological evolution does not fully
Yep.
connect. So that's where actually I agree with you. Where I think there might be difference, but I like this difference is it sounds like you might want to kind of say that there is some sort of like underlying intelligibility or intelligence.
Yeah, you want to stay away from the term ID because it sounds like a disembodied, puppeteer, but some kind of thing going on. I think I do go back to the evolutionary panentheism thing. I like that as a general understanding that fits in with both evolution and human nature, I guess, as a whole. And so that, I guess, is the idea that there is something becoming conscious of itself. We are God helping God become conscious of itself.
And I could go with that if, and of course I'm going to add the bit that you may not want to go with, but the add bit is that in terms of a panpsychism, if you try to argue that antagonism or some sort of gap, some sort of nothingness is what fundamentally enables self-consciousness, like there has to be,
Yeah.
yeah, then yeah, I would kind of say that there is a kind of weird form of consciousness or proto-consciousness in everything. But by proto-consciousness, I simply mean a type of abyssal dimension to everything. Yeah.
I like that. I think it's what dual aspect monism being the sort of like we have our brains split things. We're world splitters. Doesn't necessarily mean that. What is it? Kripal says that epistemological dualism sits very well within an ontological monism. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, and the only thing I'd say, and I don't know what he would think of this, is that my interest is in the split.
Yes.
That's why I'm a dialectician, not a dualist. So like a dualist is interested in the split. It is the two sections. I would say a dialectician is interested in
that rubbing together, that friction.
Yeah, the split. But I'm sure
You're referring biologically, by the way, to the corpus callosum, just so you know, Pete.
So, thank you. Corpus callosum.
Look out.
Remember that? What is that? That's the
strip that connects the two hemispheres.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. And there's been one guy who died, and they opened up his head and found that there was no brain in there except a little bit of the corpus callosum. He died suddenly, and his parents called him and said, "We have horrible news. We still don't know why your son died. We want to let you know that he was mentally retarded." And the parents said, "No, he's lived an actually perfectly normal life, and he lived had a job, had friends, had relationships, died suddenly, and was found to not have a brain in his head."
Okay, you can't just say that in such a blasé.
And that's our time, everybody. Thank you so much. You could say mind blown, but not for him. It was just not there. But there's a little thin strip. I believe it was the corpus callosum, or maybe it was a little bit of the prefrontal cortex. But besides that, it was just filled with fluid, just water.
Because this sounds like one of these stories that you hear in church of like, and the car ran out of petrol and then gas started to pour out of a rock. I mean, I believe you, but I'm like, you're telling me what age was this guy and what?
He was young, 20s.
He was in his 20s. He grew up normally and died suddenly. And when they did an autopsy for whatever reason, they found only a fraction of the brain.
A little bit, just a little baby brain, not even a brain, little piece of tissue. Now, what you're skipping over is what you're missing is the hours of entertainment you can get by imagining what that phone call was like for the parents who have undergone this tragedy, and then the doctors call and they're like, "Oh, we're going to find out what happened to Timmy." And they say, "We don't know, but we're sorry to hear about your mentally retarded son." And then you as a grieving parent have to tell them that your kid was not that way. He was just doing his thing, and then he died. And then that was the end of it. Imagine getting that call.
Yeah, but listen, my mind is blown on so many levels, and you're... and now one more. Okay.
Creationism starting to look a lot more logical. When we start getting into that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, my guess is
as soon as we finish this, I'm going to be looking this up because
I know what book I got it from, and I'll find the reference and try to see if I can, because I'm also curious about it. You know about Mark Twain's dream?
No.
Mark Twain, Pete. Since we're having fun story time now, and then I'll let you go. Also, my card filled up, so my audio might be a little worse, but it's okay. So Mark Twain had a dream about his brother. You don't know about this?
I don't think so.
All right.
Something's clicking, but they keep going, so nothing.
Something's clicking. Is that what you said?
Something in the back of my mind might be clicking, but keep going.
Okay. Samuel Clemens, a.k.a. Mark Twain, was known to be eccentric. He predicted his death to coincide with the appearance of Halley's Comet. He had a passion for collecting young girls. I don't know what this website is. He invented products, including a self-pasting scrapbook and an elastic strap for pants. Good for him. One of his most profound mystical experiences happened when Clemens was 23 years old. So Mark Twain worked as a steersman on a steamboat, and he got his brother Henry a job on the same steamboat in Pennsylvania. One night, the boat was docked in St. Louis. He slept over at his sister's house. This is where it gets crazy, so I'm not going to read this part. He dreamed that his brother was in an explosion. Died. Okay? Terrible nightmare. And in the dream, he goes to see his brother in the funeral parlor. And he dreams that his brother is in a metal casket wearing one of Mark Twain's suits with a bouquet of white roses with a single red rose in the center on his chest. Shortly thereafter, guess what happens? Boiler explosion, his brother dies. Women in the town gather, collect a bunch of money to have a metal casket for him, very fancy. They dress his brother's body in a suit of Mark Twain's. Mark Twain, devastated, goes to see him, walks into the room, metal coffin, wearing his suit, one detail missing. No bouquet of flowers. It's like, that's still great. Old lady walks in at that moment carrying a bouquet, all white roses with a single red rose in the middle, and puts it on his brother's chest. This haunted Mark Twain for the rest of his life. He eventually joined the American Psychical Institute, which was one of the first groups to be studying psychology in America.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
And then it turned out his brother didn't have a brain.
And these are two things I'm going to have to look up now. Wow.
It's fun, right? Yeah, that's a fun one. I'll definitely find you the one on the guy without a brain, because it is. Yeah. I read that in a book and was like, what?
Because there's a story, and I don't know if this is true, but there's a story of someone who was walking home late at night, and a phone was ringing in like a payphone, and he picked up the phone, and the guy was looking for something. He said, "No, it's a wrong number," and it was some crazy, almost unimaginable coincidence that the guy, yes, was looking for that person or something, but had phoned the wrong number, and it was not his house, it was a payphone, something weird like that.
Love it.
Weird things happen.
Weird things happen. You have something else? What were you saying?
No, I was just going to say, but the brain one's interesting because, I mean, they obviously, people are interested in how much of the brain is used and for what purposes and reasons. Like, if that turns out to be true, I guess that gives a lot more information as to what the different parts of the brains do.
This was it was all an argument about consciousness being like fundamental, not being a product of the brain, but the brain being a product of consciousness, that kind of thing. I think, is that what you're talking about?
Oh, no. Well, no, that sounds even more crazy. I was just thinking that maybe there's large parts of the brain that, do stuff, but not stuff that is vital for us to be able to communicate and do basic stuff.
Yeah. I'd be very curious. I mean, they really glossed over. I remember reading and being like, there's no way he lived that normal of a life. I mean, obviously he died young, so that isn't good. But, anyway, wild stuff.
Very good.
Life is a constant, just beautiful mystery. And evolution is fun, and creationism is fun too. So, and who's to say who's right?
Yes. We all come with our metaphysical positions.
We all come with our, it's like, we're all just like walking each other home, man. All right. What else do you got, Pete? Is that all?
Great. No, I'm excited about doing this little weekly, or well, not weekly, but regular, what books have been destroyed. That was fun. I think that's going to be a fun little thing. And any takeaways? I guess my takeaway might be, it's fun to kind of instead of critiquing, always mocking different kind of positions, is sometimes try to be empathetic, enter into it, kind of listen to it, and then try to isolate where the problem is. But it can be very good mental exercise, better than Sudokus. That's what I think.
Yeah.
That's my very unprofound takeaway.
Yeah, it's philosophical cosplay.
Yes.
Put them on and dress. Oh, look at me. I'm a little Sam Harris today. And that's fun too.
Yes.
And then hopefully that makes you less numb and less dissociated. That's my biggest takeaway, is try not to be numb and dissociated, even though it's very hard in today's society. So if you feel it, that's what you are. There's nothing you can do about it. And I'm right there with you.
Brilliant. All right.
I should really start pre-writing my takeaways. All right. Thank you, everybody. I will talk to you, and Pete and I will talk to you next time, hopefully sooner than the previous episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.